What do you get when an eccentric billionaire, $44 billion and two presidential elections collide? Amongst all the other unexpected, crazy events that have unfolded over the past 4 years, you get the rise of Bluesky, a hot new social media app that just reached 24 million users and seems like it could pose a serious threat to X as a premier real-time microblogging social network. But in online echo chambers filled with hyper-partisan discourse, it can be hard to make out just how serious Bluesky is as a new social platform, and why this particular Twitter clone is thriving where countless others have failed. On one hand, you'll hear celebrities publicly denouncing X and fleeing the platform, and headline after headline of crazy growth milestones that Bluesky's hitting. On the other hand, you'll hear X proponents ridiculing Bluesky as its own sort of echo chamber. They might say that its inevitable demise is just around the corner, and that it's a short-lived fad just like a bunch of other Twitter knockoffs. So what is actually happening though, and how did we get here? Is Bluesky as massive as the hype suggests? Is X actually dying, or is the truth somewhere in between? And what exactly is Bluesky anyways? So in this video, we'll try to answer some of these exact questions. We'll look at a brief timeline of events building up to the conditions that gave rise to Bluesky, and look at actual metrics reported by Sensor Tower around app usage across X versus Bluesky, and try to make sense of how this plays out. To start, let's go back to the early 2020s and remember how volatile the political and social media climate was. I mean, look, people have argued online since the dawn of the internet, so that's nothing new, but things felt like they were escalating more, and it was certainly the most divisive that I can remember things being in recent years. And a ton of polarizing issues started to stack up, including the dicey 2020 election and all its related controversies, COVID-19, culture war debates in general, and the Russia-Ukraine war, just to name a few. You and I lived through this. We saw the crazy video clips, the unhinged comment sections, and the vitriol flying in every direction on Twitter, Facebook, and the news. Then attached to all these debates was a meta debate about the role social media companies played as the platforms on which these conversations were hosted. And in particular, whether they were censoring content unjustly or intentionally manipulating content algorithms to affect public opinion and push certain narratives. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and others all actively moderated political content around COVID, the election, and other issues. But the contentious part was what level of moderation was appropriate, whether the concept of free speech should apply to social media, who got to decide what was fact and fiction, and what criteria justify the deplatforming of individuals. It became this overarching debate over free speech, censorship, and the co-opting of big tech companies by certain ideologies. Twitter was perhaps the most prominent and controversial of the bunch due to its nature of being a real-time news and conversation platform where the most vigorous debate occurred, and also for its banning and suspending of user accounts, most notably with its indefinite suspension of Donald Trump. So what's against this backdrop that Elon Musk, one of the most prolific, powerful, and most followed Twitter users, got involved? In January 2022, he started buying shares of Twitter, and by April, he had amassed a 9.1% ownership stake to become its largest shareholder. Then, on April 14th, he made an offer to formally buy Twitter. I won't rehash the whole Twitter acquisition saga here, but in short, $44 billion later and many months of lawsuits and drama later, Elon successfully acquired Twitter by late October 2022. Maybe the question then becomes, why did he do this? His stated intention was that it was over the issue of free speech as he saw it. He represented a large fraction of users who didn't agree with how Twitter was handling content moderation and kowtowing to governmental and cultural pressures. So he thought that bringing Twitter under new ownership was the only way to save it from itself and save humanity, in his words. Maybe you agree with him, maybe not, but what's certain is that a lot of Twitter users did not. In parallel to all this happening was a mini civil war of sorts unfolding on Twitter between the anti-Elon and pro-Elon group. I am oversimplifying by drawing lines based on whether someone supports Elon, but I do think that someone's view of Elon Musk, especially at that time, is a good predictor of what else they believe and how they would side on this issue. For many people, the idea of Elon owning Twitter was a deal breaker. And even before the acquisition closed, you had people pledging to leave the platform if Elon were to buy it. We also need to remember that during this period, a lot of people were predicting that Twitter would straight up go out of business. You had advertisers fleeing, fearing backlash. You had the media attacking the whole acquisition, not to mention the inflated price tag Elon paid and the questions of how he would even pay for it. So needless to say, once the purchase went through, a small exodus of Twitter users started to happen. So now, where do all these users go? Enter Bluesky. It's worth noting that even way before Twitter was sold, that there have been countless Twitter clone social products that have come and gone. There's also competitors still active, like Threads and Truth Social, but our attention is on Bluesky because it directly plays foil to Twitter as the most culturally prominent and philosophically opposed competitor, in my opinion, and they actually go way back together. Bluesky's origin story starts in 2019, actually within the halls of Twitter, where it was conceived under Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey as a decentralized protocol that Twitter hoped to use in the future. In 2020, once COVID hit, the project was deprioritized. But in 2021, Bluesky kicked back up, and it was actually spun out of Twitter so that it could operate independently to secure its own funding and wholly focus on building the app protocol without the risk of Twitter bureaucracy encroaching on it. So that's a lot of information, so let's dig into it more. Bluesky was originally just the name of the project within Twitter. The project was to build a decentralized protocol, which is called the AT protocol. And AT stands for Authenticated Transfer, and it's a play on the @ symbol that's used in social network handles. And what does decentralized protocol mean? Well, I can't explain all the technical details, but quoting from Bluesky CEO Jay Graber, "We wanted this to someday be the last social identity you'll ever have to create, because you can move it in between apps and services. You can take your identity and your relationships and your data with you. The goal is to make social apps work more like the web itself. Bluesky is the app that we've built on top of the app protocol, both to show how it works and to develop the protocol actually through product-driven protocol development." The comparison here is that most social networks are highly centralized, meaning they own all your data and control everything from the feed algorithms to how content is moderated to what ads you see. And a decentralized protocol is intended to be the opposite. Think Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. A decentralized social network seeks to give you control. So imagine using the same account across a Facebook, TikTok, or some new social network, all built on the same protocol. One analogy I've seen used is email, where I can use Gmail, you can use Outlook, but we can communicate seamlessly all the same across different email providers. With that said, let's get into the story of Bluesky's growth now and why they've been positioned to succeed thus far. For starters, this is a product that was literally conceived by Twitter. It's built with Twitter's DNA and with the momentum of Twitter's brand behind it. It's not like some other competitors starting from scratch. And one key early decision for them was the fact that Bluesky was spun out of Twitter before Elon got to it. With great foresight, in my opinion, Jay Graber insisted early on that Bluesky be run independently when she took the job, to ensure that it could be shielded from whatever politics and bureaucracy that befall Twitter. And of course, that turned out to be a crucible decision for Bluesky because it otherwise would have been owned by Elon now as part of Twitter after the acquisition, or maybe even shut down somewhere along the line. Alongside this is the incredible timing and market conditions for a Twitter clone to thrive. I don't think anyone foresaw at the time that Twitter would be acquired, and certainly not by Elon anytime soon. Not only did Bluesky get out of Twitter in time and have a head start building out their Twitter clone, but they also were able to launch in February 2023. This gave the platform enough time to develop for the 2024 political cycle when X's user base would get riled up again. From Elon endorsing Trump in July to Trump winning, there were so many polarizing issues along the way that drove mostly left-leaning users out of Twitter in search for a new Twitter that was ideologically different than the vision Elon was spearheading. I actually can't really think of another instance where a push factor sparked an app's viral growth like this. Most of the time it's some novel viral growth tactic, not a ton of users fleeing one platform for not agreeing with its politics. So call it luck, call it opportunity, preparedness. Basically, on top of that, over the past months, there's been this compounding viral effect as more and more high-profile people, like politicians, celebrities, journalists, and other commentators, have publicly announced their departures from X and signaled for their networks to join them on Bluesky. Okay, so now let's get into some rough numbers so we can really compare X against Bluesky. Bluesky launched in February 2023 as invite only, and according to various news articles, they hit 9 million users in September of 2024, 12 million around mid-October, and then about last week they doubled that to 24 million. To get more granular though, let's look at Sensor Tower estimates for downloads and active users. And if you don't know what Sensor Tower is, it's this popular App Store intelligence tool that basically tracks and analyzes and estimates mobile app metrics. So take these numbers with a grain of salt because they are third-party estimates, but they should be pretty directionally correct and fairly reliable. In terms of overall downloads, you see this hockey stick growth trajectory. It's a modest, successful launch with hundreds of thousands of users coming in per month, but as we get into Q4 and the election month, all of a sudden there's this traffic spike to the tune of over 7 million installs in November. In terms of OS and country breakdown, it's similar to X, meaning most users are from the US and on iOS. Now, pulling up the category rankings in the App Store, it's a similar story. Bluesky ranked pretty high in the social networking category fairly consistently before rising again in October, November, and it's in those months that it cracks the top of the overall charts. Now let's compare downloads between Bluesky and X because we want to know if X is actually losing traction during this time. This chart shows all time numbers, so Twitter's timeline is going to go way back. And we know that since the acquisition, Twitter has lost some steam, and that's reflected in the lower download velocity since 2022. And we should kind of isolate that from the Bluesky effect because Bluesky wasn't siphoning users obviously before 2023. Then as you look through 2024, X gets a growth spurt through August with all the political news cycles driving more interest. But since August, there's this clear inflection point. X drops back to its floor of just over 10 million installs per month, while Bluesky makes up a ton of that gap. This looks like a dramatic win by Bluesky, but if we break it down by day and look at the last 90 days, we see that Bluesky really spiked in the 2 weeks after the election. I think whatever exodus there was mostly happened during that period. And since then, Bluesky's daily installs has declined again. So the question is, what happens in December? Can Bluesky continue its momentum? Does growth come back to some normalized baseline? We'll see. And then if we add Threads into the picture, we actually see another angle here. Threads growth has actually been pretty colossal and yet still underrated, I think. Part of it is probably just because people expect it to be huge, right? There's heavy cross-promotion with Meta's other products, yet you'll generally hear headlines calling Threads a failure or a dying product that nobody uses, rather than the rosy coverage that Bluesky gets, even though it's way, way smaller. But before we get out of Sensor Tower, let's also quickly look at MAUs and DAUs. This captures more the real engagement rather than the pure momentum story that downloads shows. We see Threads rocketing up in monthly active users, seemingly on pace to pass X, and Bluesky barely noticeable at the bottom. The DAU story tells a slightly different story. Threads retention just probably isn't as good as X's retention because users are getting roped in, right? From Instagram, you try it, you kind of forget it, you drop it, whereas X has been this long-standing dedicated product. And then we have Bluesky, which is like between, call it 1% to 2% of X's DAU. So very tiny when you look at it that way. So with all that info in mind, what do you think? Is Bluesky here to stay? Is X going anywhere? There are a lot of potential timelines here, but my prediction is that Bluesky never overtakes X and never really breaks past that 5 to 10 million DAU mark. I think its most explosive growth period is over and that it'll continue to be a good product that survives, but will stay relegated to a niche audience. I think that their narrative and company focus will then shift to supporting other developers that build on the app protocol, kind of back to the origin of its mission, and that the Bluesky narrative will slowly fade into the background. I also think that when we look back a few years from now, we'll see this cohort of Bluesky users as a vocal minority. And to be clear, I'm not saying that critics of Elon or Trump is a vocal minority, but rather the group of passionately online Twitter power users who care enough to make a big deal of leaving X and championing Bluesky. I think that's a vocal minority. I don't know that they're reflective of the vast majority of social media users in the US and the type of content that most people actually want to consume. And maybe the election results are a case in point. And that's not a diss to Bluesky. I could be totally wrong. They could go on to blow it out of the water. But building a lasting social network is just extremely, extremely hard. On my end, it's easy to be default pessimistic about any new social product. And I think this tweet by Naval speaks to that point. People go where people are, and the network effects needed to sustain a network for the long term are just so hard to build. Myself, I've worked on more than one failed social networking product, and even to get the critical mass to sustain a tiny niche audience is hard enough. So when you then have to go up against the likes of Meta, X, or TikTok, and their established ecosystem, it's just ridiculously hard. And even in the rare cases of a new social network really blowing up, the challenge then becomes sustaining that exponential growth and outcompeting incumbents. Look at Be Real, Vine, Clubhouse, or even Google Plus back in the day. These are all products that each had tens of millions of users, and yet they could not break out further. Vine and Google Plus are long dead, and I haven't seen anyone, I know at least, use Be Real in a long time, and Clubhouse is building a completely different product now. So there's levels to the social media game, and X is still, I think, in firm control of their critical mass and powerful network effects. You can leave temporarily, but you'll likely be back either by choice or because the product you went to got acquired or died. And to be clear, there's still many ways for X to die, but I just don't think that Bluesky is going to be one of those reasons. And here's yet another angle though. Even if Bluesky keeps growing explosively, for its own definition of success, it doesn't really need to. I have to imagine that if you ask the Bluesky team what their goal is, it's not to replace X or be the top social network app itself, but rather to prove out the app protocol and stand up a successful decentralized social networking business and ecosystem. And Bluesky is really just a proof of concept that has already successfully put them on the map for that. So look, there's a million more directions we could go with this story, from predictions on how decentralized social networks would fare, to how Elon's personal brand is affecting his business, to what kind of exodus a TikTok ban could lead to. But I think I've rambled enough on the topic, and we'll cut it here. So I'd love to know what you think about Bluesky, especially if you use it actively, and what your predictions are. So thanks to you for giving me your time, and I hope to see you on the next one.